Welcome back. Well, things are coming along. They're progressing slow but surely. Since the last video, I've actually added a few more things. So the last video we painted all this surface. I went ahead and touched up the area around the train track because that didn't look quite right. And I also filled in an area here for the sky ride because that was a concrete base. And I've also painted the surface of the merry-go-round here. And I also filled in the cutie caddy track. So let me give you some close-ups of that. So here's the golf course. And you notice the track right here has been filled in darker. That's to replicate the soot and oil that had piled up on the track. I still haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to do the track itself, but this gives you a sense of a sort of worn, gravelly area there. This area in here I'm not too concerned about because that's going to be covered by the tunnel that the train went through. And then over here is a little progress on the sky ride. You can see I actually have a very tiny sign that was there for the sky ride. And then I've got the 3 pillars. I discovered in looking at photos that there was actually one right on the deck of the platform here. So I put that one in and then those 2. And I'll build the actual sky ride mechanism in 3D and then mount that later on. And then over here is the work on the carousel building, and this is the next thing that I'm going to be tackling in this video. You can see I've got basically a cardstock here printout of the merry-go-round, and I made a little arc out of it. Just cut that with a mat knife right into there and then glued it in. And I painted the line, the white line that used to be around the ride. That was to keep people back while the ride was running. And this was the actual color of the floor. The floor was concrete about up to here, and then the rest of it, since it was built over the workshop down below, this was all wood, but it was all painted the same color. This you won't be able to see once the building is in place. The building will have carriage doors, 1 here, 2 here, and 2 here, or actually 1 here. So it's 1, 2, and 1. And the only way you're going to be able to see the merry-go-round is if you happen to be over here on this side of the ride, if when they display the ride you can walk around it, and then you happen to be able to look in there. So I just put it there in case, because I am cutting out the big garage doors that they used to have here. And then the only other modification was over here for the cutie caddy. I just penciled in a line where the power rail was that powered the cars. And that's all I'm going to do for that. This had a little roof here, and I'll build that later. That's a very simple piece, one piece of cardstock that'll go on 4 little pillars there. Now these pillars and these pillars are nothing but bamboo skewers. In fact, here are the bamboo skewers. There's thick ones and there are little tiny ones. I also have thicker ones in case I need them, but I think these will do for most of the work I have at the scale I'm working. I also have one other thing that I'm very excited about. Here they are, the ladders that will make the roller coaster. So they'll be standing here. Now, what I discovered is even though these were advertised as being a 1/2 inch wide, they're actually 7/16 of an inch wide, which means I'm going to have to repunch all of these holes again. Not looking forward to that, but it is what it is. They're just a little too thin to fit into those 1/2 inch spaces. So I'll get to that later. First thing I want to do with these is I want to spray paint them white because the structure of the coaster was white. These are gray right now. But these are going to work out perfectly. I have a whole stack of them over here, and I have more coming in, so this should be plenty, considering the roller coaster will be no higher than half this height. So this should do well. So let's go take a look at the work that I'm doing on the merry-go-round building. Before that, one other little thing I forgot to show you is I made the platform for the Ferris wheel. There was a little ramp up here and then there was a platform. and I painted the inside here green because it was all grass underneath, and there were actually 2 small pine trees on either side of the Ferris wheel. Those will go in later, but that was the other little addition I made. Okay, so this is what I printed out on cardstock, and I'll show you a close-up of the work I did in Affinity Designer. Essentially, I took samples of the actual merry-go-round building from photos I had. So I have the yellow clapboard sides here that I stretched all the way along. And then I took the actual window, one of the windows from the ride, and then I simply duplicated it in the pattern that was on the ride. And then I actually took the little door that you can see and the archways, the garage doors, basically, the openings. Now you notice it's still filled with clapboard in those openings of the garage door, but that's not a big deal. Those I'm going to cut out with a mat knife. Those are the archways that I mentioned that you're going to be able to look through and see the merry-go-round on the inside. And I also added the free fireworks sign, which was always up there all summer. So that was a nice little detail I was able to work in there. Now, the big pieces are the bottom, obviously. The small pieces are the clerestory up on the top of the ride. And the pieces down here, you can see, are a little thick under the windows. Well, remember I said the ground sloped away. Underneath the ride was a workshop at the back. Up front, the ride was level with those garage doors. The ground was level right there. So you just walked right in, and then it sloped away. Now, I'm not sure how that slope is going to work out on the model, so I just kept it all the same width all the way through here, and when I put this together, I'm going to lay it down here, and I'm going to go ahead and size it by eye and just cut away, you know, the pieces that I need to in order to get it there. And then once I figure that out, there were 2 double doors at the back of the building for the workshop, and I'll glue those on later once I know exactly where it's going to fall. Now for the roof, that posed an interesting challenge. So what I did is I took a template of shingles and I made these triangles in Affinity Design. And then I filled these triangles with the shingles. I masked them. And I also made these strips here, which will go over the seams between them. And so what I'm going to do is cut these all out with a mat knife and then fit them together and glue them together so you get a circle, and then I can bend it down and fit it over the top of this area here. And then I just simply have another one and I cut it a little smaller to fit over this one, and then we have the 2 levels of the roof done. So that will be a challenge. Now the reason I did these little posts here was because the cardboard itself is not going to be stable enough to stand up to any type of pressure whatsoever. It'll just collapse. So what I'm going to do is when I fold the pieces of cardstock into that octagonal shape, I'll glue them to these posts, and that'll give it a little more supporting structure there to help it hold up. And for many of the other buildings, like the Dodgems and the Whip, they actually had supporting posts all the way around it. That's the whole building was that. There were no sides to the building. It was just supporting posts and a roof. So more like a pavilion. So these won't require this type of reinforcement. They'll be basically self-reinforced because of all the pillars around them. And then these, for the buildings at the back of the park, I'll do the same thing in the corners, put little pegs to hold them a little more stable. Projects like this are always fraught with astounding new discoveries. For instance, when I cut these out and then tried to fold them, I discovered that you can't trust the software to match up with your printer. So in Affinity Designer, I had the workspace divided into 1/2-inch grids. so I could exactly line up where all these things would fall, and I would know where to crease all of the pieces. Well, it turned out that when it printed, it was about an 1/8 inch short, which meant I was creasing right in the middle of the windows. So I had to go in. I couldn't trust the software anymore. I had to go back in, and I had to just sort of trial and error move things around and get them to a place where they pretty much would line up where they needed to line up when I folded them. So here we are with a new piece of paper, like the 5th piece of paper, with this printed out, nice cardstock. And what I'm going to do is just simply take my mat knife there and go ahead, it's actually a carpet knife, and go ahead and trim these pieces. And it's very important when you do this that you have a good sharp blade, and you don't want to dig in too much, because if you do, you'll cut right through the cardboard and into the table, and that wouldn't be a good thing. And that just comes off nice and clean like that. And I'll get the bottom. There we go. Ironically, the top level didn't need any adjustment at all. The top level printed perfectly. So I don't understand why the bottom level was off by that much. One of the other digital mysteries of life, I guess. There. And now the bottom level. That's the nice thing about having this in the computer, because if I do screw up, like my hand was to slip and I'd cut right through one of these pieces, all I have to do is go print out another one and I'm back in business. If I hand drew all this, I would be crying. All right, so that finishes up the edges along the length. Now let's do the sides. And I purposely left a lot of extra space here. That'll be overlap, so I can glue the pieces together. It's also important whenever you're working with cardboard like this to cut on, that you move the pieces around so they don't go over the same area again. Otherwise, the blade gets caught in the groove and your cut goes off. All right, one more little trim I want to make, because remember how I said that on this one, this is going to be at ground level. So this whole piece here, and I know that the ground does not slope off until the next piece after this, at least on the model. And at Mountain Park, the ground actually started sloping off right here, pretty severely down to the stage. But that didn't happen on the model, so I'm just going to trim it right there. That'll make this a lot easier to set in, and then all I have to do is worry about sculpting the bottom of this piece over here. So let me go ahead and trim this even. Hooray! Now, before I attempt to cut out the carriage doors here, what I want to do is I want to crease this, because if I try to crease after I cut these out, it's going to really buckle and it's not going to work very well at all. So all I need to do is, starting at the corner here, I'm going to measure 2 inches over. I'm going to do that at the top and bottom. So we got 2 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches, and then all I have to do lay the ruler down on the 2 marks and then just pull up. And I'll do the same over here. And just pull up and do the same over here. And as you can see, that goes right between the sections there, exactly what I want. So that will fit perfectly right onto there. There's half of my octagon. And so this one nice. All right. The noise you hear in the background is a torrential downpour that's happening just outside. So I have these glued together in one part, and then this will complete the octagon once that's all glued together. I'm just using regular wood glue for it to bond it together. And as you can see, I did the same thing here, and that will be bonded together. These were made at 1.5 inches to a side. They're slightly shorter because obviously the roof narrowed as it got higher. So the next job here, oh, and these things here, these are pieces of small gauge railroad tie that I use as weights to hold things down when I'm gluing them. So before I finish gluing this section, I need to cut out the doorways here. And I'm just simply going to do that by eye with my lovely little carpet knife. So off we go. And there we have it. Isn't that cute? Little openings. Now I figured what I'm going to do, this section here and this section here, you notice have these little posts between them, and that's going to be pretty fragile. So when I mount it over onto the table, I'm going to put another skewer here and another skewer here just to brace these pieces a little bit more. And that'll give me something to glue them onto. But for now, let me go ahead and glue these sections together. And that way, I'll let that dry. And when that's dry, I can then assemble it. And there it is. Doesn't look too shabby. I have the new supporting posts that I put in here, and so that's going to work out okay. The only problem, though, is back here. There's no lower level. There simply wasn't enough of a sculpted slope here to do anything useful. I did cut it a little bit here to make it a little lower, but it just wasn't enough. It really, the building should be about this high, and the bottom area would be under here. But there's no way to do that. If you look over here, that would make the building all tilted, and it just wouldn't look right. The problem, it turned out, is that I don't have enough Homosote on here. The Homosote layer I put on was a 1/2 inch thick. And that translates to about 8 feet. Remember I said that over here, the base of the Mountain Flyer roller coaster, when PTC built it, their base line was 14 feet above grade. And I'm assuming grade would have been the parking lot down here. That means that there is a 14-foot difference between the parking lot and this. So I would have needed 1 inch of Homosote on here in order to really sculpt this properly. If I were to try to sculpt this so that there was enough space under here, I would have nothing down here. There would be no slope at all because it all would have to come from here. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that. I hate to leave it inaccurate so that the carousel has no lower level, because it obviously did from the beginning. That would also mean that the dodgems does not have a lower level either, which is a problem. The only way to really correct the problem would be to get rid of this entire table and make a whole new one from scratch with the right amount of Homosote. And that's not going to happen. So I'm still puzzling exactly. Before I glue this down, I'm still trying to think of a way I might be able to salvage it. But it may be that it's just inaccurate and I end up with a carousel building with only one level. And that will make me sad, because I spent an enormous amount of my years at the park in that workshop underneath the carousel. I do have the upper level all done, and that will go up there once I get the roof. So the next step is to start working on the roof. So I'm not going to bore you with the details on this. You know the routine by now. I'm going to cut out each one of these sections and these strips here. And then once I have everything cut out, I'll begin the process of putting them all together and using these strips to glue them down in between the pieces. And we'll see how it works out. It may work, it may not. We'll find out. So here are all my pieces, all cut out. However, when I put them together, I end up with a really nice looking roof, if I get them together correctly. But it only uses 6 of the 8. So I have a 6-sided roof on an 8-sided building. And I don't know why. I should have majored in math or origami. The 2 other pieces of the roof are just sort of sitting here unused. And I'm not sure why. I don't know what else I could do, because I made these 2 1/4 inches wide to slightly overlap the building. And I assume if I make them thinner, I'll get more sections, but then the thinner sections won't fit properly onto the building. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on unless I move them. Well, I can't even move them further away. They would have to be on a different angle, I would think. So I guess make a sharper angle. So that'll be my next step. Well, that was a mercifully easy fix. All I did was I lengthened each piece, and by doing that, the angle changed, and that allowed me to fit 4 on a side, and when you put them all together, of course, that makes 8. So I have my octagon, which I needed. And there's my roof. Yeah! So the next step will be to use these strips to glue them together. Then, since I'm not gluing the top piece there, I should be able to bend them and shape them so that they fit onto the lower level of the building. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of those bamboo skewers and I'm going to glue them right onto here so it gives it a little more stability, and it'll give me a lip onto which I can glue the roof onto the building. So there we have it. All right, so I've glued these sections together, sections of 2, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, using the ruler, I'm just going to end these right along there. Same here. then, once I've bent all of them, I'm going to glue 2 more sections together and then let Joe dry. I'm going to let those dry. And then I will bend those sections and then glue the rest of them together. So we should have our roof in about an hour. All right, there is my lovely roof. The only problem is it's flat. If I pull this apart and I pull this in, it actually makes a real sloped roof. But if I have all 8 sections equally spaced like that, obviously, because of the way I glued it, I get a flat roof. So it's back to the drawing board to see how I can turn 8 sections into 8 sections so that I have a sloped roof like this. So I'm probably going to have to make one with 9 sections that I then fold over into 8. Stay tuned. And behold, I have the solution. This is a nonagon. It's a 9-sided object. And all I did was create a blank nonagon and then fill it with the roofing sections from my octagon. So now there are 9 sections. So all I'm going to do is cut this out and then slice it, and then I can just fold it under, and then I will have my roof with a slope. Ha ha ha! Let's see if it works. And after cutting, I creased, you put it together. Look at that, a perfect sloped roof. And if we look over here at the merry-go-round, perfect fit. So now all there is for me to glue this together, let it dry, and then we're off and running. Yeehaw! All right, we're now into day 4 of trying to put together this merry-go-round building. And I've glued this down so the base is down, even though I don't have the basement. And that's nice and stable. And I finally figured out, like we said in the last clip there, we figured out how to do this by making a nonagon and gluing it together. And then I figured out the solution of how to actually attach it. I made these little flaps inside of the lower part of the roof. And I'm going to use silicone. I don't want to use the wood glue because it leaves a yellow tinge, which doesn't look good. The silicone is clear and it's a little more pliable. So I'm just going to apply a bead all around the edge here. And then I'm going to slip this on, and these little pieces on the edge, little flaps, will grab in, and that should secure it nicely without discoloring it. And I also did the same. I made exactly the same for the top of the building that's going to go on this piece here. And these have little flaps in them as well, so it's going to work the exact same way. And I also am going to take a bamboo skewer and put a little flagpole right on the top. Now, this used to have flagpoles all the way around each of the corners here. I'll do that later once it dries. I'm not going to try to put them in now. But this flagpole at the top, no problem. I can poke that in, and at least we'll have one little flag on the top of it. So let's see how this all comes out. And we're getting there. Here it is so far. I just put, you can see the caulk I applied in here, and that's holding up pretty well. And the roof worked out just the way I wanted to do it. I applied the bead of caulk right around here, and then I just slid that right in, and it fit perfectly. So that's what I'm going to do for this last section. Just fill in the caulk there, slide this piece on, And then we are good to go. And there it is. Finally finished. All I gotta do is add a little flag on the top of that post there. And I even added the entrance sign over here and the exit sign over here. I didn't yet add the little railings that go here. That's something I'm going to be doing in the future as I get to it. But the building is now done, all put together. So that gives me a general idea of how long it's going to take to build all the rest of these buildings that I have to do. But that's for another time. The next thing I'm going to tackle is going to be the roller coaster. Stay tuned.